Okay, so we have here a concept map from last class, and the remainder of 2.8 is for you to focus on the anaerobic type of cell respiration. So a quick review. So as humans, we consume food, so these nutrients can be able to break it down to form ATP, or to get energy from our food. What you need to know primarily is how to break down carbohydrates or sugar molecules. So again, we did a demonstration, and you saw that the gummy worms exploded in the presence of oxygen. So that's how much energy is contained in one gummy worm. Now we're not exploding because when we consume that glucose, it undergoes a process called cellular respiration. It is a very controlled process wherein that amount of energy that supposedly is to explode, you use that energy to bind phosphate to ADP to form ATP. And that way, when you break down ATP, it releases that same amount of energy. So the remaining of the unit is going to focus on anaerobic cell respiration. So just to review, there's two types of cellular respiration. Anaerobic needs to happen first, but in the presence of oxygen, you continue the process of aerobic cellular respiration, wherein you can get large amounts of ATP. So here we go. Let's review our PowerPoint. So we're talking about this already. Let me move my video here. All right. So these nutrients, these molecules, you can use it as a source of energy. It takes a while to break down lipids and proteins. So our cells normally uses glucose as the immediate source of energy. And this is our equation. Glucose in the presence of oxygen releases CO2 and water. CO2 is a waste product, and we breathe it out. Water is not really a waste product because this can be used by the cells in the many condensation and hydrolysis reactions inside the cell. Now, the whole process of breaking down glucose into these products yields a large amount of ATP. So, you don't need to memorize this. I'm sorry, I keep moving my video. You don't need to memorize this, but this is for you to visually see what's happening. So you have glucose in the presence of oxygen. You break it down into these products called CO2 and water. And the process of breaking it down releases energy that you can use to form ATP, 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 ATP. Okay. And we talked about ATP, and please remember that if we break this bond right here, if we take one phosphate out of this molecule, it releases a large amount of energy because this bond is really strong. So when we break it apart, that really strong bond releases some amount of energy, and the cell uses that energy for these cellular activities. And we just learned active transport. Endocytosis and exocytosis needs energy to move substances in and out of the cell. All right, another visual representation. You consume food, so you break it down into glucose. It's in your blood. It's going to go inside your cell. And in the presence of oxygen, you can break it down and release large amounts of ATP. And in the process, release CO2 as a waste product and water that can be used by the cell. All right, then we talked about a respirometer. You can use this to measure the rate of respiration of insects or even seeds. Seeds themselves, when they germinate, they also undergo cellular respiration, so they consume oxygen. Again, we can submerge this vial underwater, and as the seeds respire, it will require oxygen, so water will move inward. You can check this website for the animation for this lab. So this is called a respirometer. It measures the rate of cellular respiration. All right. Now, as mentioned, there's two types of cellular respiration. If there's oxygen present, it's called aerobic cell respiration. It happens in the mitochondria. If there's not enough oxygen inside the cell, so that pyruvate will continue into anaerobic cell respiration. In animals, we form lactic acid. For some organisms, such as yeasts and plants, they form ethanol and carbon dioxide. So for the remainder of the unit, we want to check, is there any application for this anaerobic cellular respiration? Because you would think these are waste products. Well, yeah, they are waste products. For the yeast, they are our waste product, but we can make use of that in industry. All right, so let's talk about yeast. So yeast are, you might have seen this in the kitchen. It looks like sugar, it's powder, looks like flour, but these are actually fungi, and they are unicellular eukaryotes. So this is how they look at under the microscope. And when they're dry, like your powder in the kitchen, they're inactive. But once you start mixing it in water and you give them sugar as their food, they will start to become activated and they will respire. Okay, and as I've mentioned, if they respire, they produce either ethanol or CO2. So how do we take advantage for that in making bread? So what we normally do is we mix our flour, we sprinkle it with yeast, we set it aside, we let it rise, R-I-S-E. So the dough will actually rise. It's rising because as the yeast is respiring, it's producing CO2 gas. Okay, so that gas is trapped in your dough and it rises. And when you bake your bread, the ethanol will obviously evaporate because the temperature is really hot. But CO2 that's trapped inside the bread will rise in the bread as you're baking it. So the end result is you're going to get bread that is fluffy, that's aerated. There's CO2 gas. So as you can see here in the picture, there's holes in the bread. Okay, so CO2 might be a waste product of your yeast, but we're making use of it, at least in bread making. Another waste product of anaerobic cell respiration in yeast is ethanol. So what can we use ethanol for? It's not in the book, but we can use this process to ferment sugar in making wine or beer. What the IB wants you to know, though, is the production of bioethanol or a biofuel. You know that in our cars we use unleaded gasoline or petrol, and when we combust that petrol, it releases energy. That's why our engines move. The heat makes the engine work and move. So ethanol can also be combusted. If you burn ethanol, you also get a large amount of heat that can power your engines. So why not use ethanol as a source of fuel? So it's a renewable energy source. It means we don't have to keep digging or mining for fossil fuels. We can just use microorganisms in the lab to make ethanol for us. So we harvest sugarcane and maize. That's our source of starch. And this starch, we mix it with different kinds of enzymes so we can convert it into simple sugars. Once it's in the form of simple sugars, your yeast and other microorganisms can start using that sugar and releasing CO2 and ethanol in the process. So we can extract that ethanol in the process called distillation. You boil the sample and evaporate the water, but extract the ethanol. And that ethanol is what we put in our cars to fuel our cars. And this is just out of my curiosity. I was wondering which countries are already adapting using this technology. So I'm not surprised that the United States is using that. However, I'm surprised with Brazil and Thailand. I'm not aware that they're actually using bioethanol. It's a cheap source of renewable energy, so why not use it? I think the problem is many of our engines, car engines, are still running in petrol. So we have yet to manufacture and market cars that are run by biofuel. All right. So again, these are waste product of yeasts, anaerobic cellular respiration, and we can make use of that in industries. How about humans? So for us, if there's no oxygen, we produce lactic acid. If there's oxygen, cellular respiration continues here to produce large amounts of ATP. Now, when do we actually need anaerobic cell respiration? So it says here weightlifting and sprinting. If you need that instant source of energy, you don't want to wait for glucose to completely be metabolized, to completely undergo cellular respiration. But what the cells will do is resort into anaerobic cell respiration. This is faster. Although it just yields a small amount of ATP, you form 2 molecules of ATP per glucose molecule here. You still have ATP. Not a lot, but you still have. So in cases of instant need of ATP, we can get it from anaerobic cell respiration. Anaerobic cell respiration provides that ATP for us. That's why it says the rapid generation of ATP. We can maximize muscle contraction. That moments when you need ATP instantly. Here's a problem though. The waste product of anaerobic cell respiration in humans is lactate or lactic acid. Lactic acid. And this can accumulate in the muscle cells. To be able to completely metabolize lactic acid, we need oxygen. And it can take several minutes for enough oxygen to be circulated by the blood, so you can completely break down lactate. And this demand for oxygen builds up, and we call that oxygen debt. So the higher the oxygen debt, the more oxygen is needed to completely break down lactate. As I also have mentioned that if lactate is in your blood, it produces that fatigue or painful sensation. We don't exactly know the physiology behind the pain, but what we do know is that it serves as an evolutionary survival trait for us to prevent ourselves to keep moving, because it's painful. So your body is going to stop you from moving your arms. If you did some weightlifting and your muscles are still sore, just means that you have not completely broken down lactate, and you need a lot of oxygen. You need some time for oxygen to completely circulate in this area to be able to metabolize your lactate. So while waiting, there's that painful sensation to prevent you from movement. Okay, because the body knows you can't really produce that much ATP, and you're still waiting for lactate to completely be broken down. All right, so that's the remaining parts of 2.8. Thank you.